What happened next will shock you beyond belief. A single moment changed everything for an entire city, and it started with a dog who refused to stay quiet. Before we dive into this incredible story that you're about to listen to, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The autumn sun hung low over Riverside High School that Friday afternoon, casting long shadows across the empty hallways. Most students had already rushed home for the weekend, but the faint echoes of sneakers squeaking on gymnasium floors and the distant thud of volleyballs still filled the air. Practice sessions were winding down, and the usual chaos of teenage chatter, mixed with coaches shouting instructions, created that familiar after-school symphony. Officer Maya Santos sat on a wooden bench outside the main gymnasium, her fingers gently scratching behind the ears of her four-legged partner. Duke, a 7-year-old German shepherd with patches of gray starting to show around his muzzle, lay stretched out beside her, with his head resting on his massive paws. His deep brown eyes watched the hallway with the calm alertness of a dog who had seen it all. Duke wasn't just any police dog. He was what the department called a therapy canine now, semi-retired from the intense drug detection work that had made him famous throughout the county. These days, his job was gentler, but no less important. He visited schools, helped calm anxious students during difficult situations, and provided that special kind of comfort that only a well-trained dog could offer. Maya often joked that Duke could read people better than most humans could read books. The afternoon felt perfectly ordinary. Maya checked her phone for the third time in 10 minutes, scrolling through routine emails from the district office. A few students walked by, some stopping to pet Duke, who accepted their attention with the patience of a saint. His tail would give a lazy wag, but his eyes never stopped scanning the surroundings. That's when everything changed. Emma Rodriguez pushed through the heavy doors leading from the main building toward the locker rooms. Her long dark hair fell in messy waves around her face, and her backpack hung heavy on one shoulder. At 15, Emma had that awkward teenage way of moving, like she wasn't quite sure where her arms and legs belonged. But today, something was different about her usual quiet demeanor. Maya noticed her first. Emma's shoulders were shaking slightly, and she kept wiping at her face with the sleeve of her oversized hoodie. The girl moved quickly, almost frantically, like she was trying to outrun something invisible. Duke's head lifted immediately, his ears perked forward, and that relaxed expression vanished from his face. He rose to his feet slowly, his entire body suddenly tense and focused. A low, almost inaudible growl rumbled in his chest. "What is it, boy?" Maya whispered, her hand instinctively moving to rest on Duke's back. She had learned to trust his instincts completely. In their 3 years working together, Duke had never been wrong about sensing when something was off. Emma disappeared into the girls' locker room, the door swinging shut behind her with a soft thud. But Duke didn't relax. If anything, his agitation grew stronger. He started pacing in a tight circle, his claws clicking against the polished floor. His breathing became shallow and quick, and that low growl grew more insistent. Maya had seen Duke alert to drugs before, had watched him indicate when someone was carrying something they shouldn't be, but this was different. This felt more urgent, more desperate. Duke wasn't just alerting to a substance, he was alerting to danger. "Easy, Duke," Maya said, standing up and clipping his leash to his collar. "Let's go see what's got you so worked up." They moved toward the locker room entrance, Maya's police radio crackling softly on her shoulder. The hallway suddenly felt too quiet, too empty. Even the sounds from the gymnasium seemed muffled and distant. Duke pulled against his leash, something he never did. His training had always been perfect, his obedience absolute, but right now, every muscle in his body was straining toward that locker room door. His brown eyes looked up at Maya with an intensity that made her stomach clench with worry. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting deeper shadows in the hallway. Maya paused outside the locker room door, listening. She could hear something inside, soft, muffled sounds that took her a moment to identify. Someone was crying. Maya knocked gently on the door. "Hello? This is Officer Santos. Is everything okay in there?" The crying stopped immediately, followed by the sound of someone quickly moving around inside. Footsteps, the rustle of fabric, the metallic clang of a locker door slamming shut. "I'm fine," Emma's voice called out, but it was thick with tears and shaking with something that sounded like fear. "I'm fine, really," Duke whined, a high-pitched sound that Maya had never heard from him before. He scratched at the door with his front paws, his entire body vibrating with nervous energy. Whatever was in that locker room, it had him more agitated than she had ever seen him. Maya made a decision. "Emma, I'm coming in, okay? I just want to make sure you're all right." She pushed open the door and stepped inside, Duke immediately surging forward beside her. The locker room smelled like disinfectant and teenage perfume, with that underlying mustiness that came from years of athletic equipment and damp towels. Rows of blue metal lockers lined the walls, and wooden benches created narrow walkways between them. Emma stood near the far end of the room, her back pressed against a row of lockers. Her face was red and blotchy from crying, and her hands were shaking as she clutched a tissue. But it was her eyes that caught Maya's attention. They were wide with fear, darting between Maya's face and something on the bench behind her. Duke zeroed in on that bench immediately. His nose went straight to a purple backpack that sat partially unzipped, and his growling became more pronounced. He didn't try to touch it, didn't paw at it or mouth it like he might with a toy. Instead, he sat down directly in front of it and stared, his body rigid with alertness. "Emma," Maya said gently, taking a step closer, "what's wrong? You can talk to me." The girl's lip trembled, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "It's nothing," she whispered. "It's really nothing. I'm having a bad day." But Maya's eyes were on the backpack now, and she could see why Duke was so interested. There was something sticking out of the partially open zipper, something that didn't belong in a teenage girl's school bag, the corner of what looked like a small electronic device, with wires visible around its edges. Maya's training kicked in immediately. Her hand moved to her radio, but she kept her voice calm and steady. "Emma, honey, I need you to step away from that bag, okay? Just take a few steps toward me." "Why?" Emma's voice cracked. "I didn't do anything wrong. I swear I didn't do anything wrong." Duke's growling intensified, and he shifted his weight from paw to paw, his eyes never leaving the backpack. Maya had seen him react to explosive devices during training exercises. This was exactly how he behaved when he detected something dangerous. "I believe you," Maya said, and she meant it. Looking at Emma's terrified face, seeing the genuine confusion and fear in her eyes, Maya was certain that whatever was in that bag, the girl had no idea how dangerous it might be. "But I need you to move away from the bag right now. Can you do that for me?" Emma nodded shakily and stepped toward Maya, her hands still clutching the damp tissue. As soon as she moved away from the bench, Duke relaxed slightly, but his attention remained fixed on the backpack. Maya spoke into her radio, keeping her voice low but urgent. "This is Santos at Riverside High. I need backup and possibly the bomb squad. We have a suspicious device in the girls' locker room." Emma's face went white. "Bomb squad?" she whispered. "What are you talking about? That's just my backpack." "When did you last look inside it?" Maya asked, moving closer to examine the bag without touching it. Emma's silence was answer enough. Her mouth opened and closed several times before she finally whispered, I haven't opened it today. I grabbed it from my locker after lunch and came straight here for practice, but then I started feeling sick and..." She trailed off, staring at the bag like she was seeing it for the first time. Maya could see the exact moment when understanding dawned in the girl's eyes. The realization that something was very, very wrong. The device sticking out of the bag was small and rectangular, about the size of a smartphone, but thicker. Wires protruded from one end, and there was a small LED light blinking red in a slow, steady pattern. Maya had seen enough suspicious packages in her career to know that this wasn't something a high school student should be carrying around. "Emma," Maya said carefully, "I need you to think very hard. Has anyone been near your locker today? Anyone who might have put something in your bag without you knowing?" The girl shook her head frantically. "No, nobody. I don't think so. I left it in my locker during lunch like I always do, and when I came back..." She stopped, her eyes widening. "Wait, when I came back, the zipper was open a little bit. I thought maybe I just forgot to close it all the way, but..." Duke suddenly stood up and walked to another part of the locker room, his nose working the air. He stopped in front of locker number 23 and sat down, looking back at Maya with that same intense expression. Maya's radio crackled with the voice of her supervisor. "Santos, backup is en route. What's your status?" "We have a female student with a suspicious device in her backpack," Maya reported. "My K9 is also alerting to locker number 23. I need this entire wing of the school evacuated immediately." Emma started crying again, harder this time. "I don't understand what's happening," she sobbed. I didn't do anything. I just came here to change for volleyball practice. And I started thinking about Jake and how he embarrassed me in front of everyone yesterday, and I just wanted to be alone for a minute. Maya's heart went out to the girl. Whatever was happening here, Emma was clearly an innocent victim who had gotten caught up in something much bigger than a typical teenage drama. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, followed by the voices of other officers and school administrators. Maya could hear the familiar, authoritative tone of Principal Davis giving instructions to clear the building. Duke had moved again, this time to a third locker, then a fourth. Each time he would sit and stare at Maya with that look that said he had found something significant. Whatever was happening at Riverside High, it was much more complex than a single suspicious device in a student's backpack. Maya's mind raced through the possibilities. A bomb threat, obviously. But why would someone target a 15-year-old girl? And why were there multiple locations that had Duke's attention? This felt coordinated, planned. Someone had specifically chosen Emma, specifically used her backpack, and specifically placed other items throughout this locker room. The door opened, and Detective Luis Rodriguez entered with two other officers. Maya had worked with Luis for years, and she could see the tension in his face as he took in the scene. "What do we have?" he asked quietly. "Student found with a suspicious device in her backpack," Maya replied. "My K-9 has alerted to multiple locations in this room. I think we're looking at something bigger than a simple bomb threat." Luis nodded grimly. "Bomb squad is 5 minutes out. We've got the entire East Wing evacuated, and the fire department is setting up a perimeter." Emma looked between the officers with growing panic. "Please," she whispered. "I really didn't do anything wrong. I don't even know what that thing is." Maya knelt down beside the girl, her voice gentle but firm. "Emma, I believe you. But right now, I need you to help us figure out what happened. Can you think of anyone who might want to hurt you? Anyone who's been asking questions about your schedule, your locker, anything like that?" The girl's face scrunched up in concentration, and she wiped at her nose with the back of her hand. "There was this guy," she said slowly. "Online. He said his name was Marcus, and he went to Roosevelt High across town. We've been talking for a few weeks." Maya and Luis exchanged a look. Online predators often started with seemingly innocent conversations before escalating to more serious crimes. "What kind of things did you talk about?" Luis asked, pulling out his notepad. "Just normal stuff," Emma said. "School, friends, how I was having trouble with some girls in my class. He was really nice, really understanding. He said he had been through the same thing when he was my age." Duke had settled down near the backpack, but remained alert, his ears constantly moving as he monitored the sounds around them. Maya trusted his instincts completely, and right now, those instincts were telling her that the immediate danger had been contained, but not eliminated. "Did this Marcus person ever ask you about specific details of your day?" Maya pressed. "Your class schedule, when you had lunch, which locker was yours?" Emma's face went pale again. "He asked me to send him a picture of my locker once. He said he wanted to send me something, like a surprise gift, but I told him my parents would be mad if I gave out my address, so he said maybe he could leave something at school instead." Maya felt her stomach drop. This was looking more and more like a carefully orchestrated plan, with Emma as an unwitting participant. The bomb squad technicians arrived, their heavy equipment and protective gear making the small locker room feel even more cramped. Maya and the other officers moved back to give them space, but Duke refused to leave his position near the backpack. "Ma'am, we need to move the dog," one of the technicians said. "He's trained in explosive detection," Maya replied. "He might be able to help you identify what you're dealing with." The lead technician nodded and approached Duke slowly. The dog looked up at Maya, waiting for her signal. When she gave him the command to stay, Duke remained perfectly still while the technician examined the device. "It's not a bomb," the technician announced after a few tense minutes. "It looks like some kind of electronic jamming device, probably designed to disrupt cell phone or Wi-Fi signals." Maya frowned. A signal jammer was dangerous in its own way, but why would someone want to disrupt communications at a high school? And why use a student as an unwitting carrier? "There's something else," the technician continued, carefully removing the device from Emma's backpack. "There's a cell phone in here, and it looks like it's been modified. The screen is cracked, but it's still functional." He handed the phone to Luis, who examined it carefully. The screen showed a text message that had been sent just 20 minutes earlier, Package delivered. Waiting for signal. Emma looked at the phone with confusion. That's not mine, she said. I've never seen that phone before in my life. Maya's radio crackled again. Santos, we've got a situation developing in the main office. Principal Davis found something suspicious in his desk drawer. We need you and your canine up there immediately. Duke was already moving before Maya could give him the command, his nose in the air as he headed toward the door. Whatever was happening at Riverside High, it was far from over. Emma grabbed Maya's arm as she started to leave. What's going to happen to me? The girl asked, her voice small and scared. You're going to be fine, Maya assured her. Detective Rodriguez is going to stay with you and ask you some more questions about this Marcus person. We need to find out who he really is and what he's planning. As Maya and Duke hurried through the corridors toward the main office, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were dealing with something much more complex than a simple bomb threat. The signal jammer, the modified phone, the multiple locations that had caught Duke's attention, it all pointed to a coordinated plan that was still in motion. The autumn sun was setting now, casting long shadows through the windows as they made their way through the nearly empty school. Maya could hear the distant sound of sirens as more emergency vehicles arrived, and she knew that whatever was happening at Riverside High was about to make headlines across the entire city. Duke trotted beside her with renewed energy, his professional instincts fully engaged. Maya had learned to read his body language over the years, and right now, every signal he was giving her said the same thing. They were walking into something big, something dangerous, and something that was far from over. The main office door stood open, and Maya could see Principal Davis pacing behind his desk, his face pale and his hands shaking slightly as he spoke to another officer. On his desk sat another small electronic device, similar to the one they had found in Emma's backpack. Duke immediately alerted to the device, but his reaction was different this time. Instead of the focused attention he had shown in the locker room, he seemed agitated, almost anxious. His tail was tucked low, and he kept looking back toward the hallway they had just come from. "What is it, boy?" Maya whispered, but she was starting to understand. Duke wasn't just detecting dangerous devices anymore. He was detecting a pattern, a network of connected threats that were spread throughout the school. And if Maya's instincts were right, Emma Rodriguez had been chosen as the perfect unwitting accomplice in what was shaping up to be one of the most sophisticated and dangerous plots the city had ever seen. Principal Davis looked up as Maya and Duke entered his office, his face drawn with worry and confusion. "Officer Santos, thank God you're here. I found this thing in my desk drawer about 10 minutes ago. I have no idea how it got there." Maya examined the device without touching it. It was identical to the signal jammer they had found in Emma's backpack, but this one had additional components attached, small antenna-like extensions that hadn't been present on the first device. Duke circled the desk slowly, his nose working the air around the device. But then something strange happened. Instead of sitting and alerting like he had done with Emma's backpack, Duke moved past the desk and headed directly toward a filing cabinet in the corner of the office. He sat down in front of it and looked back at Maya with that same intense expression. "Has anyone been in your office today who shouldn't have been?" Maya asked Principal Davis while keeping one eye on Duke's behavior. "Well, the usual people," Davis replied, running a hand through his graying hair. "My secretary, a few teachers, some maintenance staff. Oh, and there was a new substitute teacher who stopped by around lunchtime to pick up classroom keys." "Of course, it's all in the—" Davis started to say, then stopped. He looked at the filing cabinet where Duke was sitting, his face going pale. "Oh no, that's where we keep all the substitute teacher files, along with the master key schedules and building access codes." Maya spoke into her radio immediately. "This is Santos. I need a complete list of all substitute teachers who were in the building today, and I need security footage from the main office area for the past 4 hours." While they waited for backup to arrive with the necessary equipment, Maya decided to examine the filing cabinet more closely. Duke's alerts had been accurate every time so far, and she wasn't about to ignore his instincts now. "Mr. Davis, I need you to open this cabinet very carefully," Maya instructed. "Don't touch anything inside. Just open it so we can see what's there." The principal's hands shook slightly as he inserted his key and turned it. The cabinet door swung open to reveal rows of neatly organized files, but something was immediately wrong. Several folders had been pulled forward, their contents disturbed. Papers were sticking out at odd angles, and there were gaps where files should have been. Duke whined softly and pawed at the air near the cabinet, but he didn't try to get closer. Maya had seen this behavior before during their training. It meant he could smell something dangerous, but it wasn't an immediate explosive threat. "What files are missing?" Maya asked. Davis leaned forward carefully, scanning the folders. The substitute teacher database, the master key log, and his voice caught. The emergency evacuation procedures and the building's security system manual. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. Someone had been planning this very carefully. They hadn't just planted signal jammers randomly throughout the school. They had studied the building, learned the procedures, and positioned themselves to cause maximum disruption. Detective Rodriguez's voice crackled through Maya's radio. "Santos, we've got updates on the girl. The online contact she mentioned, the account was created just 3 weeks ago, and all the messages were sent from different IP addresses. Someone was using sophisticated routing to hide their identity." "Any luck tracing the phone number or email?" Maya responded. "That's the interesting part. The phone they were texting from, it's registered to a Marcus Chen, but Marcus Chen died in a car accident 6 months ago. Someone's using a dead man's identity." Maya looked at Principal Davis, who had gone even paler. This wasn't just a bomb threat or a simple prank. This was a carefully orchestrated operation using stolen identities, sophisticated technology, and inside knowledge of the school's security systems. Duke suddenly stood up and walked to the window that overlooked the school's parking lot. His ears perked forward, and that low growling started again. Maya joined him at the window and looked out at the scene below. The parking lot was filled with emergency vehicles, police cars, fire trucks, an ambulance, and the bomb squad's specialized van. Parents were starting to arrive, having received automated calls about the evacuation. But Duke wasn't looking at any of that. His attention was focused on a small white van parked across the street, partially hidden behind a cluster of trees. "Mr. Davis, do you recognize that van?" Maya asked, pointing to the vehicle that had caught Duke's attention. The principal squinted through the window. "I don't think so. We don't allow parking on that side of the street during school hours, but classes are over now, so—" Maya grabbed her binoculars from her duty belt and focused on the van. Through the windshield, she could make out a figure sitting in the driver's seat. The person appeared to be watching the school, and there was what looked like electronic equipment visible on the dashboard. "I need units to surround that white van across from the school immediately," Maya spoke into her radio. "Possible suspect vehicle with occupant conducting surveillance." But as soon as she said the words, the van's engine started. Maya watched through her binoculars as the driver quickly put the vehicle in gear and began to drive away. "All units, white van heading north on Maple Street, license plate." Maya squinted, trying to read the numbers, but something was wrong. The license plate was covered with mud, making it impossible to read clearly. Duke began pacing back and forth in front of the window, his agitation growing more intense. Maya had learned to trust his instincts completely, and right now, those instincts were screaming that they were missing something important. The bomb squad technician who had been examining the second device looked up from his work. "Officer Santos, you need to see this. This device is more sophisticated than the first one. It's not just a signal jammer. It's been modified to intercept and record communications before blocking them." Maya felt pieces of a puzzle starting to come together in her mind, but the picture they were forming was more disturbing than she had initially thought. What kind of communications? Cell phone calls, text messages, even Wi-Fi data. Someone could use this to capture passwords, personal information, anything that gets transmitted electronically within about a 100-yard radius. Principal Davis sank into his chair. "We handle all our student records electronically now. Medical information, addresses, emergency contacts, even some financial aid data for families who qualify for free lunch programs." Maya's mind raced through the implications. A sophisticated criminal organization could use that kind of information for identity theft, stalking, or targeting vulnerable families. But there was still something that didn't add up. "Why use Emma?" Maya asked aloud. "If they had access to the building through a substitute teacher, why involve a student at all?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Emma Rodriguez appeared in the doorway of the principal's office, accompanied by Detective Rodriguez and another officer. The girl looked calmer now, but her eyes were still red from crying. "I know why they picked me," Emma said quietly. "I figured it out while I was talking to the detective." Everyone in the room turned to look at her. Maya nodded encouragingly. "What did you figure out, Emma?" "Marcus, or whoever was pretending to be Marcus, he didn't just ask me random questions about school. He asked me very specific things about my schedule, about when I had study hall, about which teachers I liked and didn't like. Emma took a shaky breath. And he asked me about my mom. What about your mother? Principal Davis asked gently. Emma's voice became very small. She works at the bank downtown, the First National Bank. Marcus asked me all sorts of questions about her job, about what time she goes to work, about whether she ever brings work home with her. Maya felt her stomach drop. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together now, and the picture they revealed was far more dangerous than anyone had realized. Emma, what does your mother do at the bank? Maya asked, though she was starting to suspect she already knew the answer. She's the head of the electronic security department, Emma whispered. She's in charge of all the computer systems that protect people's accounts and personal information. Detective Rodriguez whistled low under his breath. So, they weren't just planning to steal student information from the school. They were using the school attack as a way to get to the bank's security systems through Emma's mother. Maya nodded grimly. The signal jammers, the sophisticated surveillance equipment, the fake identity. It was all part of a plan to commit a major financial crime. Emma had been chosen not just because she was a lonely, vulnerable teenager, but because her mother had access to the kind of security systems that criminals would pay millions to compromise. Duke had moved to the office door and was looking down the hallway with his ears pricked forward. Maya followed his gaze and saw something that made her blood run cold. A man in a maintenance uniform was walking down the hallway carrying a toolbox, but something about his movements was wrong. He was walking too quietly for someone wearing work boots, and he kept looking over his shoulder, as if he was checking to make sure no one was following him. Maya spoke quietly into her radio. I have a suspicious individual in maintenance clothing, currently in the main hallway near the administrative offices. All units be advised. But as she spoke, the man seemed to sense that he was being watched. He looked directly at the office window, and Maya got a clear view of his face. He was young, maybe in his 20s, with dark hair and sharp features. More importantly, he was holding something in his hand that looked like a small remote control. Duke's growling became more intense, and he pressed himself against the office door as if he wanted to go after the man immediately. The man in the maintenance uniform suddenly broke into a run, heading toward the school's rear exit. Maya could hear his footsteps echoing through the empty hallways as he abandoned any pretense of belonging there. All units, suspect is fleeing toward the rear of the building, Maya radioed. He's carrying what appears to be a remote device. Do not let him leave the premises. But even as she said it, Maya realized they might be too late. The man had been in the building long enough to plant additional devices, to gather information, or to set up whatever plan he and his accomplices had been working on. Duke was practically vibrating with the need to chase after the suspect, but Maya knew she needed to keep him close. There were still too many unknowns, too many potential dangers throughout the building. Emma had started crying again, but this time it was different. These weren't tears of confusion or fear. These were tears of guilt and self-blame. This is all my fault, she sobbed. I told him everything. I told him about my mom's job, about my schedule, about which teachers were nice to me. I even told him which locker was mine, and drew him a little map of the school layout, because he said he might transfer here next semester. Maya knelt down beside Emma's chair. Listen to me very carefully. None of this is your fault. You were targeted by criminals who knew exactly how to manipulate someone your age. They studied you, they learned what would make you trust them, and they used that information to hurt you and your family. But I should have known better, Emma whispered. My mom always told me never to talk to strangers online, never to give out personal information. These weren't just strangers, Detective Rodriguez added. These were professional criminals using sophisticated techniques. They would have found a way to get the information they needed with or without your help. Principal Davis had been quiet during this exchange, but now he spoke up with a voice full of concern. Emma, do you think your mother might be in danger right now? Should we contact the bank? Emma's eyes widened with fresh terror. Oh God, I didn't think about that. What if they're planning to hurt her? Maya was already reaching for her radio when it crackled with an incoming message. All units, we have a report of suspicious activity at First National Bank downtown. Multiple individuals with electronic equipment have been observed in the parking area. Bank security is requesting immediate assistance. The room fell silent except for the sound of Emma's quiet crying. Maya felt the weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just a school emergency anymore. This was a coordinated attack on multiple targets, using a teenager's innocence as the entry point for something much larger and more dangerous. Duke had positioned himself between Emma and the door, his protective instincts fully engaged. Maya could see in his eyes that same alertness and determination that had made him such an effective police dog during his active years. "Detective Rodriguez, I need you to coordinate with bank security immediately," Maya instructed. "Find out exactly what kind of access Emma's mother has and make sure she's somewhere safe." "What about me?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What's going to happen to me?" Maya looked at the frightened girl and felt her heart break a little. Emma had been through more in one afternoon than most adults experienced in a lifetime, and the worst part was that she blamed herself for being victimized. "You're going to be fine," Maya said firmly. "We're going to make sure you and your mother are both safe, and we're going to catch the people who did this to you." But even as she said the words, Maya knew that the situation was far from over. The man in the maintenance uniform was still at large, potentially with access to more sophisticated equipment. The white van that had been conducting surveillance had disappeared, and somewhere out there, criminals with advanced technical knowledge were preparing to use the information they had gathered to commit crimes that could affect hundreds or thousands of innocent people. Duke suddenly lifted his head and looked toward the window again. Maya followed his gaze and saw something that made her stomach clench with worry. Smoke was beginning to rise from somewhere behind the school building. Have you ever wondered how far criminals will go to cover their tracks? What Maya and Duke discovered next changed everything they thought they knew about this case. What Maya and Duke discovered next changed everything they thought they knew about this case. The smoke was thick and black, rising in an ominous column from somewhere behind the school's main building. Maya's radio exploded with urgent chatter as units reported the fire and called for additional emergency services. But Duke's reaction told a different story than what everyone else was seeing. Instead of showing concern or alertness about the fire, Duke seemed almost relieved. His tense posture relaxed slightly, and he looked up at Maya with an expression that she had learned to interpret as, "Finally, something is making sense." "That's not an accidental fire," Maya said, voicing what Duke's body language was telling her. "That's a distraction." Detective Rodriguez looked up from his phone, where he had been coordinating with bank security. "What do you mean?" "Think about it," Maya explained, her mind racing through the timeline of events. "Someone plants sophisticated electronic devices throughout the school, uses a student as an unwitting accomplice, steals security information from the principal's office, and then conveniently disappears just as we're closing in on them. Now suddenly, there's a fire that will require every emergency responder in the area to focus their attention on evacuation and safety protocols." Principal Davis stood up from his desk, his face pale with understanding. "They're clearing the field, getting rid of witnesses and first responders so they can execute whatever they're really planning." Maya spoke into her radio with urgent authority. "All units, the fire may be a deliberate distraction. Do not abandon your posts or reduce security around the building. We may have multiple suspects still on the premises." But even as she gave the orders, Maya could hear the chaos building outside. Fire trucks were arriving with sirens wailing, and she could see through the window that the emergency coordination area in the parking lot was shifting focus from the suspicious devices to the immediate threat of the fire. Emma had stopped crying and was now staring out the window with a look of dawning comprehension on her young face. "They planned this whole thing, didn't they? The talking to me online, the stuff in my backpack, even the fire. It was all planned." Maya nodded grimly. "I think so, and I think we're about to find out what they were really after." Duke suddenly stood up and walked to the office door. His ears pricked forward in that way that meant he was hearing something the humans couldn't detect. Maya followed him into the hallway and immediately understood why he was alert. The school's fire alarm system wasn't working. Despite the visible smoke outside, there was no automated announcement, no flashing lights, no ear-piercing siren that should have been echoing through every corridor of the building. "Mr. Davis," Maya called back into the office, "when was the last time the fire alarm system was tested?" "Just last week," the principal replied, joining them in the hallway. "It was working perfectly. The safety inspector said it was one of the best systems he'd seen in a school this size." Maya felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with disturbing clarity. The signal jammers, they weren't just meant to disrupt cell phones and Wi-Fi. They were specifically designed to interfere with the school's emergency communications systems. Detective Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, his phone pressed to his ear. "Maya, we've got a problem. I just spoke with Emma's mother at the bank. She says there's been a widespread communication failure in their computer network starting about 20 minutes ago. All their security systems are running on backup power, and their external communication lines are completely dead. The scope of the criminal operation was becoming terrifyingly clear. This wasn't just a school threat or even a simple bank robbery. This was a coordinated attack on multiple targets, designed to create chaos and confusion while the real crime was carried out somewhere else entirely. Duke began walking down the hallway with purpose, his nose working the air as he tracked something that only he could detect. Maya followed him, trusting his instincts completely. They passed empty classrooms and abandoned lockers, their footsteps echoing in the unnaturally quiet building. They stopped outside the school's main computer lab, where Duke sat down and gave Maya that look that meant he had found something significant. The door was slightly ajar, which was unusual since the computer lab was always kept locked when classes weren't in session. Maya pushed the door open carefully and stepped inside. The computer lab looked normal at first glance. Rows of desktop computers, a whiteboard covered with programming assignments, posters about internet safety on the walls. But Duke immediately went to a computer in the back corner and began sniffing around its base. Maya examined the computer more closely and noticed that several cables had been disconnected and reconnected recently. The screws holding the computer case together were loose, and there were small metal shavings on the floor around the base of the machine.
"Someone's been inside this computer," Maya said, speaking into her radio. "I need a tech specialist down here immediately to examine what modifications have been made."
But before anyone could respond, the computer screen flickered to life on its own. Text began scrolling across the monitor in green letters against a black background, like something out of an old-fashioned hacker movie. Stage 1, complete. Initiating Stage 2. All systems compromised. Prepare for final phase. Maya felt her blood turn cold. This wasn't just about the school or the bank. The criminals had used the school's computer system as a launching point for something much larger. Emma appeared in the doorway of the computer lab, having followed them down the hallway despite instructions to stay in the principal's office. When she saw the message on the computer screen, her face went white. "That's the same computer I used during my study hall," she whispered. "The one where Marcus told me to check my email every day at 3 o'clock. Maya spun around to look at the girl. "You've been using this specific computer? Not just any computer in the lab?" Emma nodded, her eyes wide with fear and understanding. He was very specific about it. He said that computer had the best internet connection, and he wanted to make sure I could see the pictures he was sending me clearly. Detective Rodriguez had arrived and was now examining the computer with a tech specialist who had been working with the bomb squad. The specialist's face was grim as he traced the modifications that had been made to the machine's internal components. "This is sophisticated work," the tech specialist said. "Someone has installed a hardware-based keystroke logger, a network packet sniffer, and what looks like a remote access Trojan. They could monitor everything that happens on the school's network from this single point." Maya's mind raced through the implications. How long would it take to set up something like this? For someone with the right skills and equipment, maybe an hour, 2 at most, but they would need physical access to the machine and enough time to work without being interrupted. Principal Davis had joined them in the computer lab, and his face showed growing horror as he understood what had happened. "The substitute teacher, the one who came by my office at lunchtime. She said she was having trouble with the computer in her assigned classroom and asked if she could use the lab instead." Maya felt anger building in her chest. The criminals had been inside the school for hours, possibly days, setting up their operation right under everyone's noses. They had used fake identities, manipulated a vulnerable teenager, and compromised the school's entire computer network. Duke had moved to another computer and was showing the same alert behavior. Maya checked that machine and found similar modifications, then another computer and another. By the time they had finished examining the entire lab, they discovered that 8 different machines had been compromised. They weren't just stealing information, Maya realized. They were setting up a command center. They could monitor and control multiple systems from here while appearing to be anywhere else. The tech specialist was furiously typing commands into one of the uncompromised computers, trying to trace the network traffic and understand the full scope of the breach. "This is bad," he said after several minutes of analysis. "Really bad. They've created backdoor access to not just the school's systems, but to any network that connects to the school's internet infrastructure. Detective Rodriguez looked up from his phone with a grim expression. I just got word from downtown. The communication failures aren't limited to the bank. The city's emergency dispatch system, the hospital's patient records network, and 3 major businesses in the financial district are all reporting similar problems. Maya felt the weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just a crime targeting one school or one bank. This was a coordinated cyber attack on the entire city's infrastructure, using Riverside High School as the entry point. Emma had been listening to the conversation with growing distress, and now she spoke up in a voice barely above a whisper. How many people are going to get hurt because of what I did? Maya knelt down beside the girl and took her hands gently. Emma, listen to me very carefully. You didn't do anything wrong. These people are professional criminals who spent weeks planning this operation. They would have found a way to get into these systems with or without your help. But I made it easier for them, Emma said, tears streaming down her face again. I drew them maps, I told them about my mother's job. I used the computer they wanted me to use every single day for 3 weeks. Duke seemed to sense Emma's distress and moved closer to her, gently pressing his head against her leg in the way that therapy dogs are trained to provide comfort. The girl reached down and buried her fingers in his thick fur, finding some solace in the contact with the gentle animal. Maya's radio crackled with an urgent update. All units, we have visual confirmation of multiple suspects in the area behind the school. At least 4 individuals with sophisticated equipment are attempting to access the building's utility infrastructure. Maya stood up quickly, her hand moving to her weapon. They're not finished yet. The computer lab was just the beginning. She looked around the room at the compromised machines, the cables snaking across the floor, the evidence of an operation that had been planned and executed with military precision. But there was something that still didn't make sense. If they already have access to all these systems, Maya said aloud, working through the logic, why are they still here? Why not just execute their plan remotely and disappear? The tech specialist looked up from his analysis with a troubled expression. Because they need something more, something they can only get by being physically present. Duke had moved to the window that looked out toward the back of the school building, where the smoke was still rising. His body language was tense again, alert and focused. Maya joined him at the window and saw something that made her stomach clench with fear. 4 figures in dark clothing were working around the school's main electrical transformer, the large gray box that controlled power distribution to the entire building. They had opened the transformer's access panel and were connecting what looked like additional electronic equipment to the existing electrical systems. They're not just hacking the computer networks, Maya realized with growing horror. They're taking control of the building's entire electrical infrastructure. Principal Davis looked out the window and saw what they were doing. If they gain control of our electrical systems, they could manipulate anything that runs on power. Lights, locks, emergency systems, even the elevators. Maya spoke rapidly into her radio. All units, suspects are tampering with the main electrical transformer. They appear to be installing additional control equipment. We need to stop them before they complete whatever they're doing. But even as she gave the orders, Maya could see that the figures outside were working with practiced efficiency. They knew exactly what they were doing and exactly how long they had to do it. The computer screen behind them flickered again, and new text appeared. Stage 2 complete. Electrical systems under control. Initiating lockdown protocol. Suddenly, every light in the building went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, casting eerie red shadows through the hallways. But more troubling than the darkness was the sound of heavy mechanical locks engaging throughout the building. Maya tried the computer lab door and found that it wouldn't open. The electronic lock system had been activated, sealing them inside. They've turned the school into a prison, Detective Rodriguez said grimly, and we're the prisoners. Duke began pacing in front of the door, his agitation growing more intense. Maya could hear similar sounds from other parts of the building. Voices calling out as other officers and emergency personnel found themselves trapped in various rooms and corridors. Emma was now crying quietly in the corner, overwhelmed by the realization that her innocent online conversations had led to something far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. Maya examined the electronic lock mechanism on the door, looking for any way to override it manually, but the system had been designed to be tamper-proof, and the criminals had clearly studied its operation in advance. How long can they keep us locked in here? Principal Davis asked. The tech specialist was still working frantically at one of the uncompromised computers, trying to find a way to regain control of the school's systems. Theoretically, as long as they want, they've essentially turned the building's own security systems against us. Maya's radio was filled with similar reports from throughout the building. Officers, school staff, and emergency personnel were trapped in classrooms, offices, and stairwells. The criminals had effectively neutralized the entire emergency response while maintaining complete control over the situation. But Duke wasn't giving up. He had found something near the back wall of the computer lab that had caught his attention. Maya followed him and discovered a small ventilation grate that was slightly loose. "Duke, are you thinking what I think you're thinking?" Maya asked quietly. The dog looked up at her with an expression that clearly said yes, and Maya realized that their best hope for escape might be crawling through the building's ventilation system with a 70-pound German Shepherd. But before she could examine the ventilation grate more closely, the computer screen flickered one more time with a message that made everyone in the room freeze with terror. Final phase initiated. City infrastructure compromised. Evacuation impossible. Prepare for system shutdown in 60 minutes. What nobody realized was that the criminals' plan was just beginning, and the worst was yet to come. But can you guess what Duke's incredible discovery in that computer lab would lead to next? Maya knelt beside the loose ventilation grate, her fingers working to remove the screws that held it in place. Duke watched her intently, occasionally whining softly, as if to encourage her efforts. The emergency lighting cast strange shadows across the computer lab, making everything feel surreal and nightmarish. "Are you seriously considering crawling through the vents?" Detective Rodriguez asked, his voice tight with stress. "Unless you have a better idea for getting out of here," Maya replied, finally loosening the last screw. The metal grate came away in her hands, revealing a rectangular opening that was just large enough for a person to crawl through. Emma had stopped crying and was now watching the escape attempt with fascination. "Where does that lead?" she asked. Principal Davis consulted a building schematic that he kept in his wallet. The main ventilation shaft runs along the back wall of the building. It connects to all the major rooms and eventually leads to the mechanical room in the basement. Maya examined the opening more carefully. It would be a tight fit, especially with Duke, but it was definitely possible. More importantly, the ventilation system was one of the few parts of the building that wasn't controlled by the electronic security systems. "If I can get to the mechanical room," Maya said, "I might be able to manually override some of the electrical systems and unlock the doors." The tech specialist looked up from his computer with a grim expression. "You need to hurry. I'm monitoring their network traffic, and it looks like they're preparing to initiate something called Phase 3 in about 45 minutes. Maya didn't want to know what Phase 3 involved, but she suspected it wouldn't be good for anyone trapped inside the building. She turned to Duke and spoke in the firm, clear voice she used for giving him commands. "Duke, we need to go through there. Can you do it?" The German Shepherd looked at the opening, then back at Maya, then at the opening again. After a moment, he wagged his tail once and moved closer to the wall. Maya took that as a yes. "Detective Rodriguez, you're in charge here until I get back," Maya said, preparing to climb into the ventilation shaft. "Keep monitoring their communications and try to figure out what Phase 3 involves." "What if you don't make it back?" Emma asked quietly. Maya looked at the frightened girl and felt her heart clench. "I'll make it back. Duke and I have gotten out of tighter spots than this before." She wasn't entirely sure that was true, but Emma needed to hear something reassuring. Maya climbed into the ventilation shaft first, her police equipment making it awkward to maneuver in the tight space. The metal ductwork groaned under her weight, and she hoped it would hold both her and Duke without collapsing. Duke followed, without hesitation, his claws scraping against the metal as he pulled himself into the shaft. For such a large dog, he moved with surprising grace and quiet efficiency. The ventilation shaft was dark and cramped, lit only by the faint glow of emergency lighting that filtered through other grates along the way. Maya used her flashlight to navigate, following the path that Principal Davis had described toward the mechanical room. They crawled in silence for several minutes, the only sounds being their breathing and the occasional creak of the metal ductwork. Maya tried not to think about what would happen if they got stuck or if the shaft collapsed under their combined weight. Duke suddenly stopped moving and pressed his nose to one of the side vents. Maya could see light coming through the grate, and she carefully positioned herself to look into the room beyond. It was Principal Davis's office, where they had started this whole ordeal, but now there were 3 people inside, and none of them belonged there. 2 men and a woman, all dressed in dark clothing, were working with sophisticated electronic equipment that they had spread across the principal's desk. Maya recognized one of the men as the fake maintenance worker they had seen earlier. The woman appeared to be in charge, giving quiet instructions to the others as they monitored various computer screens and communication devices. "Status report," the woman said into a headset microphone. "Building lockdown is complete," came a voice through her earpiece, loud enough for Maya to hear through the vent. "All emergency responders are contained. We have approximately 40 minutes before they start trying to break down doors manually." "And the bank?" Team 2 reports that the security systems are completely compromised. They're inside the main vault area now, should have access to the safety deposit boxes within the next 20 minutes. Maya felt her blood run cold. While everyone had been focused on the school emergency, another team of criminals had been carrying out a massive robbery at the bank where Emma's mother worked. But there was more. "What about the hospital?" the woman asked. Team 3 is in position. The patient records database is completely accessible, and they've identified at least 12 high-value targets. Wealthy patients whose medical information can be sold or used for blackmail. Maya realized with growing horror that this wasn't just about money. The criminals were stealing personal information that could be used to destroy lives, compromise national security, or target vulnerable individuals. Duke pressed closer to the vent, his body tense with the desire to act. Maya placed a calming hand on his back, knowing that they needed to gather more information before making any moves. "And Phase 3?" one of the men asked. The woman smiled, and there was something chilling about her expression. "Phase 3 is the beauty of this whole operation. In 35 minutes, we trigger a complete blackout of the city's power grid. Every emergency service will be overwhelmed dealing with traffic accidents, people trapped in elevators, hospital patients on life support. While they're scrambling to restore power, we disappear with everything we've stolen." Maya understood now why the operation was so sophisticated. The school wasn't just a target, it was the perfect distraction. While every police officer, firefighter, and paramedic in the city was focused on the emergency at Riverside High, the real crimes were happening elsewhere. But the woman wasn't finished explaining. "The best part is that when investigators try to piece together what happened, all the evidence will point to a group of domestic terrorists who were angry about the school board's recent policy changes. We've planted enough fake digital footprints to keep them busy for months." One of the men laughed softly. "And the girl?" "Emma Rodriguez will be found with a manifesto on her computer, confessing to planning the whole thing as revenge against the school that failed to protect her from bullying. By the time anyone figures out the truth, we'll be in a country that doesn't extradite." Maya felt rage building in her chest. Not only were these criminals planning to steal millions of dollars and compromise thousands of people's personal information, they were also planning to frame a 15-year-old girl for the entire operation. Duke sensed her emotional state and pressed closer, offering comfort and support. Maya took a deep breath and forced herself to think clearly. Getting angry wouldn't help Emma or anyone else who was depending on them. She carefully backed away from the vent and continued crawling toward the mechanical room. Now that she understood the full scope of the criminal operation, she knew that stopping them was about much more than just unlocking the doors of the school building. The mechanical room was exactly where Principal Davis had said it would be, accessible through a larger vent that opened into the basement. Maya and Duke dropped down into the room, grateful to be able to stand upright again. The mechanical room was filled with the building's electrical and HVAC equipment, massive gray boxes with blinking lights, thick cables running along the walls, and the constant hum of machinery. Maya had no idea how most of it worked, but she could see that several pieces of equipment had been modified with additional electronic components. Duke immediately went to one of the electrical panels and sat down in his alert position. Maya examined the panel and found that someone had installed what looked like a small computer directly into the school's electrical control system. She spoke quietly into her radio, hoping that the signal could penetrate from the basement level. "This is Santos. I'm in the mechanical room. The criminals have installed control devices throughout the electrical system. I need someone to talk me through removing them safely." Static was her only response. The criminals' signal jamming was too effective to allow radio communication from the basement. Maya looked at the electrical panel, then at Duke, then back at the panel. She had two choices: try to remove the devices herself and risk electrocution or causing more damage, or find another way to stop the criminals before they could complete Phase 3. Duke made the decision for her. He walked to another part of the mechanical room and began pawing at what looked like a maintenance access panel in the floor. Maya joined him and found that the panel covered a tunnel that led to the building's utility connections.
You think we can get outside through there? Maya asked.
Duke's tail wagged once, and Maya decided to trust his instincts. She opened the access panel and found a concrete tunnel just large enough for them to crawl through. According to the markings on the wall, it led to the street-level utility access point behind the school. They crawled through the tunnel, which was damp and smelled like earth and concrete. Maya's knees were getting scraped on the rough surface, but she pushed forward, knowing that time was running out. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 minutes, they reached another access panel. Maya pushed it open carefully and found herself looking out at the area behind the school where she had seen the criminals working on the electrical transformer. The area was now empty, the criminals having completed their work and moved on to other parts of their operation. Maya and Duke climbed out of the tunnel and found themselves in the middle of what looked like a sophisticated command center. Tables had been set up with multiple computer screens, communication equipment, and what appeared to be remote control devices for various building systems. Cables ran everywhere, connecting the equipment to the electrical transformer and to several vehicles parked nearby. Duke immediately began sniffing around the equipment, his alert behavior indicating that he could detect something significant. Maya examined the computer screens and realized that the criminals were monitoring and controlling not just the school, but multiple locations throughout the city. One screen showed the layout of the bank where Emma's mother worked, with red dots indicating the locations of the criminal team inside. Another screen displayed the hospital's computer network, with patient records scrolling by at high speed. A third screen showed what appeared to be the city's power grid, with various sections highlighted in different colors. Maya realized that she was looking at the control center for the entire operation. If she could disable this equipment, she might be able to stop Phase 3 and give law enforcement the evidence they needed to catch all the criminals involved. But as she reached for the main power switch, she heard footsteps behind her. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," a familiar voice said. Maya turned around and found herself facing the woman who had been giving orders in Principal Davis's office. She was holding a gun, and her expression was calm and professional. "Officer Santos, isn't it?" the woman said. "I have to admit, I'm impressed that you managed to get out of the building. Not many people would have thought to use the ventilation system." Duke was growling low in his throat, his body coiled and ready to attack. But Maya knew that the woman was too far away for Duke to reach her before she could fire her weapon. "It's over," Maya said, trying to project more confidence than she felt. "I know about the bank robbery, the hospital hack, everything. Even if you complete your plan, we have enough evidence to track you down." The woman smiled. "Actually, Officer Santos, you don't. Everything you think you know is exactly what we wanted you to know. The bank robbery, that's just a distraction. The hospital hack, also a distraction. The real prize is something much more valuable than money or medical records." Maya felt her stomach drop. "What are you talking about?" "Tell me, Officer Santos, what does your dog alert to?" Maya looked down at Duke, who was still growling, but had shifted his position slightly. Something about the woman's question made her uneasy. "Explosives, drugs, and—" Maya stopped, understanding dawning on her face. "Chemical weapons," the woman finished. "Your dog is trained to detect chemical weapons, and for the past hour, he's been alerting to trace amounts of a very specific compound that we've been releasing into the school's ventilation system." Maya's blood turned to ice. "You've been poisoning the building." "Not poisoning," the woman corrected. "Testing. We needed to see how quickly a chemical agent could be distributed through a building's HVAC system, and how effectively it could be detected by trained animals. Your dog has been providing us with valuable data about the dispersal patterns and concentration levels." Maya realized with horror that Emma and everyone else trapped inside the building had been unwitting test subjects in a chemical weapons experiment. But Duke's behavior told a different story. His alerting hadn't been random or general. It had been specific and targeted. He had been tracking not just the presence of chemical agents, but their source. And right now, he was looking directly at the woman with the gun. Just as Maya realized what Duke was trying to tell her, the German Shepherd made his move. Without warning, he launched himself forward, covering the distance between them in two powerful bounds. The woman's eyes widened in surprise, and she tried to bring her gun around to fire at the attacking dog. But Duke was too fast, too well trained, and too determined to protect his partner. What happened next would change everything, but you'll have to guess whether Duke's heroic leap saved the day or made everything worse. What do you think happened when a 70 PU? Maya felt anger building in her chest again. These criminals had terrorized an entire city, traumatized a vulnerable teenager, and put countless lives at risk, all for money. Backup officers arrived just as Maya finished documenting the evidence at the command center. Detective Rodriguez was among them, and his face showed both relief and exhaustion. "How bad is it?" he asked. Maya gestured to the equipment around them. They were using the school as a distraction while they robbed the bank and stole medical records from the hospital. They also planned to crash the city's power grid to cover their escape. What about the people trapped in the building? The lockdown system should be easy to override now that we have access to their control equipment, Maya explained. And there was never any real chemical threat. They just used Duke's training against us to make the situation seem more dangerous than it was. Detective Rodriguez shook his head in amazement. And they were planning to frame Emma for the whole thing? Maya nodded grimly. They had created an entire fake digital history showing her as a domestic terrorist. If we hadn't caught them, she would have spent the rest of her life in prison for crimes she didn't commit. Duke had been exploring the rest of the command center and had found something else that caught his attention. Maya followed him to a van parked nearby and discovered that it was filled with additional equipment and documents that detailed the full scope of the criminal operation. Among the papers, Maya found detailed profiles of dozens of potential victims, students whose parents worked in sensitive positions, elderly patients with valuable assets, city employees with access to critical infrastructure. Emma had been just one target in a much larger plan that could have affected thousands of people. But there was something else in the van that made Maya's blood run cold. A folder labeled Phase 4 contained plans for similar operations in 6 other cities, with detailed timelines and target assessments. This wasn't just a local criminal enterprise. It was part of a national network of sophisticated cybercriminals. Maya spoke into her radio with urgent authority. "I need FBI involvement immediately. This is bigger than a local crime. We're looking at a multi-state criminal organization with plans to target multiple cities." While they waited for federal agents to arrive, Maya and Duke returned to the school building to help with the evacuation of the people who had been trapped inside. The criminals' lockdown system had been successfully overridden, and emergency responders were now free to move throughout the building. Maya found Emma in the computer lab where they had left her, surrounded by Detective Rodriguez and several other officers. The girl looked up when Maya and Duke entered, her face brightening with relief. "You came back," Emma said quietly. "I told you I would," Maya replied, kneeling down beside the girl. "And I have some good news. We caught the people who did this to you, and we have proof that you were an innocent victim. You're not in any trouble." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of relief rather than fear. "What about my mom? Is she okay?" "She's fine," Detective Rodriguez assured her. "Bank security kept all the employees safe, and the robbery was stopped before they could steal anything significant." Duke approached Emma and gently placed his head in her lap, offering the comfort and support that therapy dogs are trained to provide. The girl buried her fingers in his fur and closed her eyes, finally able to relax for the first time in hours. "What happens now?" Emma asked. Maya looked around the computer lab at the evidence of the criminal's sophisticated operation, then back at the frightened girl who had been unwittingly caught up in something far beyond her understanding. "Now we make sure this never happens to anyone else," Maya said firmly, "and we help you heal from what these people put you through." Over the next several hours, as FBI agents processed the crime scene and interviewed witnesses, the full scope of the criminal operation became clear. The network had been operating for over 2 years, targeting vulnerable individuals in cities across the country and using sophisticated social engineering techniques to gain access to secure systems. Emma's case had been particularly valuable to them because of her mother's position at the bank, but investigators found evidence of dozens of other students, elderly patients, and isolated individuals who had been manipulated in similar ways. The woman Maya had captured turned out to be Dr. Sarah Chen, a former cybersecurity specialist who had used her expertise to develop the techniques the criminal network employed. She had been wanted by federal authorities in connection with similar crimes in 5 other states. As the investigation continued, Maya learned that Duke's detection of the fake chemical threat had been the key to unraveling the entire operation. Without his alerts, investigators might never have realized that the school emergency was connected to the other crimes happening throughout the city. 3 weeks later, Maya returned to Riverside High School for a special assembly where Duke was being honored as a hero. The gymnasium was packed with students, teachers, parents, and community members who wanted to thank the German Shepherd for his role in stopping the criminal operation. Emma was there too, looking healthier and more confident than she had during those terrifying hours in the computer lab. She had started therapy to help her process the trauma of being manipulated and betrayed, but she was slowly beginning to trust again. When it came time for Emma to present Duke with his honorary award, a special collar with a medal that read, "Hero Dog," she knelt down beside him and whispered something in his ear that made his tail wag enthusiastically. "What did you tell him?" Maya asked with a smile. Emma looked up with tears in her eyes, but they were good tears this time. "I told him thank you for believing in people, even when people let him down." Mayor Sandra Williams took the podium to address the crowd. What happened here 3 weeks ago could have been a tragedy that affected our entire city. Instead, it became a story of heroism, intuition, and the incredible bond between a police officer and her canine partner. She gestured to Maya and Duke, who were standing at the side of the stage. Officer Santos and Duke didn't just stop a crime in progress. They prevented a network of criminals from destroying the lives of thousands of innocent people across multiple states. The crowd erupted in applause, and Duke's tail wagged harder as he sensed the positive energy in the room. Mayor Williams continued, "I'm pleased to announce that thanks to the evidence gathered during this investigation, the Riverside Police Department will be receiving federal funding to expand our canine program. We'll be training more therapy dogs like Duke to work in schools and hospitals throughout our city." After the ceremony, as Maya and Duke walked through the school corridors that had been the scene of so much drama just weeks before, Maya reflected on how much had changed. The computer lab had been completely rebuilt with new security systems. Principal Davis had implemented new protocols for verifying the identity of substitute teachers and maintenance workers. And Emma was slowly rebuilding her confidence with the help of counselors and the continued support of her friends and family. Duke stopped in front of Emma's locker, the same locker where the criminals had planted their first device. The girl approached them shyly, still somewhat intimidated by the large German Shepherd, despite everything they had been through together. "How are you doing, Emma?" Maya asked gently. "Better," Emma replied honestly. "Some days are harder than others, but I'm learning that what happened to me wasn't my fault, and I'm learning to trust my instincts better." Duke sat down and looked up at Emma with patient, kind eyes. After a moment, the girl reached out and petted his head, no longer afraid of the dog who had helped save her life. "Officer Santos," Emma said quietly, "do you think Duke would visit me sometimes? Not for police work, just as a friend?" Maya smiled and looked down at Duke, who was already wagging his tail in response to Emma's question. "I think he'd like that very much." As they prepared to leave the school, Maya's radio crackled with a routine call, a minor traffic accident across town that required a canine unit for drug detection. Normal police work, the kind of everyday call that had filled their days before the crisis at Riverside High. But as they walked toward their patrol car, Duke suddenly stopped and looked back at the school building. His ears were pricked forward, and his body was alert but relaxed. Maya followed his gaze and saw students and teachers moving through the hallways, going about their normal activities in a building that was once again safe. Duke's tail wagged once, as if to say, "Job well done," and then he trotted beside Maya toward their next assignment. The criminals had thought they could use Duke's training against him, turn his abilities into a weapon for their own purposes. Instead, they had discovered that the bond between a police officer and her canine partner was stronger than any technology they could deploy. 6 months later, Maya received a letter in the mail with no return address. Inside was a hand-drawn picture of a German Shepherd with the words, "Thank you for teaching me that heroes come in all shapes and sizes," written in Emma's careful handwriting. At the bottom of the page, in smaller letters, Emma had added, "Duke taught me that sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to trust someone who sees the world differently than you do." Maya showed the picture to Duke, who sniffed it carefully and wagged his tail. Then she pinned it to the bulletin board in their office, right next to his commendation certificate and the newspaper clipping about their heroic actions at Riverside High School. The criminal network that had targeted Emma and dozens of other victims across the country was completely dismantled. Dr. Sarah Chen and her associates were sentenced to lengthy prison terms, and the federal investigation led to the recovery of millions of dollars in stolen assets.
But perhaps most importantly, Emma Rodriguez learned that she was stronger than she had ever imagined, and that asking for help when you need it isn't a sign of weakness, it's a sign of wisdom.
And somewhere in the city, Duke continued to do what he did best: protect and serve, one alert at a time. If this story touched your heart or taught you something about trusting your instincts, please like, share, subscribe, and comment below. Let us know what you think Duke's next adventure should be, and tell us where you're watching from around the world. The story that started with a crying teenager and a concerned dog became a testament to the power of intuition, courage, and never giving up on people who need help the most. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness lead to the biggest changes in the world.